Mm.
Okay. So I have it recording right now. So Ryan, go for it.
Sure. So today is April 13th, and this is a Finance Committee meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to sort of walk through the history of our TIF and the impending TIF revenue financing that we are exploring and that we are starting to read legislation on. In attendance, we have myself, Council President Wolf. We have Mayor Hughes. We have our fiscal officer, Jeffrey Wilczek. We have councilpersons Anna Stacy Koss, Nikki Shrestha, Jason Camera. We also have various attorneys and bankers and financial advisors, village planner Eric Fisher, and Leah Klein, who is village clerk, is good enough for now. And yeah, there we go. So that's who's all here. So I will start because I was on council when we engaged in the TIF, right? And so this goes back to the MI development. And a TIF is tax incremental financing. And what it is you designate an area within your municipality and it, look at that, pretty. But yeah, so, and then you set what is basically a baseline tax value on those properties. And then any increment, any increase of that, the tax revenue that would be generated by that increase goes into a special fund, the TIF fund, that has limited use, right? It's only for uses that benefit the TIF area, right? So that is typically, and non-operation costs, right? It's got to be capital improvement, things like buildings that will benefit that area, roads, infrastructure, that kind of stuff. So that's, I think, a clear, accurate description of what a TIF is and how we got it. So particular to our TIF, we did pledge as part of our agreement with MI the first $4 million of revenue from the TIF to pay them back for the infrastructure that we received in that development, right? That's also part of our TIF deal. So why don't we pause there? Anybody can tell me I'm lying if I explain TIF wrong. And if anybody has questions about TIF or our TIF, now would be a good time to get those out of the way.
Yeah, Council President Wolf, this is Emmett Kelly. Maybe if I could just add a couple things to that.
Sure.
So I think you explained it in a great manner. So you take the increment, that new value that's created, and so the property tax that would be paid on that go into the TIF fund for, in this case, reimbursing MI for the public infrastructure improvements they made. I think the one key thing that I would just add is that the school district receives its compensation as a result of TIF. So the schools got paid, and then the rest of the revenue that goes in the TIF fund is then used for that reimbursement.
Yeah. Yeah, the school was not included in our TIF, so their slice of property taxes goes to them.
Exactly. And then in that case, we call it a non-school TIF.
Yep. There we go.
I do have a question, guys, and I'm sorry, but when we're talking finances and stuff like this is completely on the other side of what I'm comfortable with. And it might be a stupid question. Does this have any, can this raise taxes or cost our residents any extra money in the future at all?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, for us to raise taxes would be an entirely different thing. This doesn't change their millage rates on their properties. It doesn't do anything. It's really shuffling how the money is collected and what pots it goes into.
Okay, so
thank you for answering that.
I'm going to piggyback on Nikki, and I've had some people approach me and ask whether we can kind of reduce RETA or do something about that as well. Will that impact us financially to the point that this would be something that we can't do long term, or can it, I guess, will it maintain our tax levels so that we wouldn't be able to lower it in a few years?
that is a much bigger than a breadbasket conversation. I mean, in my opinion, I think that we are approaching this in the most fiscally responsible way available to us. If you want my opinion and my short answer, the long answer is, if we wanted to cut, and again, I don't think that your question is this conversation, in my opinion, but we could do that today by cutting all services, right? That would be the easiest way to cut taxes, is you cut all services and they can have it all back. But I don't think that's what we're really talking about here today. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I just want to make sure that this isn't going to somehow in some sort of way impact us financially, that we're not talking about. So I just want to lay it all out.
So here's how I'm going to answer that question. To me, I agree with Brian completely. I don't think this has anything to do with that. We don't have to, I think that the negative way to say this, or the positive way, we don't have to fix the lakes. We don't have to get a new building. We want to fix the lakes. We want to get a new building. We want to get these things done. So it kind of goes with Brian's answer. Yeah, if we don't want to do those things, then yeah, we could talk about a RETA decrease sooner rather than later. But I think the average resident would rather see those things get fixed, and then at the end of that. So I don't feel like we're doing anything with this TIF that the majority, again, majority, I'm not saying all, that the majority of the residents want to see fixed first. So that's kind of my quick answer. I don't feel like I don't think we're pushing ourselves any further from getting a decrease in it. I think it boils back down to, what do the residents want to see get done?
I agree with you.
At the end of the day, that's
right.
Kind
of that's a great answer.
If I can add on to Councilman Cost, if I can just say, I think what you're looking for is, in this particular case, does this impact us in a way that can change those tax values long term? And I would say no, because this is a one-time pot of money over a certain period of time, and you have it to utilize in a specific manner towards improving the village. And Emmett or David Rogers or Jeff, feel free to jump in on that.
Here, actually, hold on. I'll throw in one more thought in there that the bright light just went on for me. These are two different tax bases, right? So RETA is property tax, right? And this, or is income tax, and the TIF is property tax. Beyond that, the funds in the TIF can't be used for operations, which is what the revenue that comes in from income tax is for. So these two, never the two shall twain, right? This is not money we could spend on operations. So it doesn't, in that light, in my opinion, it doesn't really directly impact anything that we have going on with RETA or our income tax rate.
Great, that answers my question. Again, I'm asking these things for the sake of transparency, so that we're all on the same page. That makes sense. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions about the formation of the TIF, what the TIF is, or anything like that? No.
Councilman Wolf, I think our attorneys and financial advisors had some presentations and some discussion they wanted to.
Yeah, if they now that we are past that, I just know we wanted to lay that baseline. But if someone has something prepared that they wanted to lay out, I am glad to shut my trap.
And I think what we're going to do is, and Mr. Taggett, tell me if you disagree, but I think you're going to do a presentation real quick with the summary that we have. But I just want to, not to confuse matters here at all, but Council President Wolf, there was an update in the law since this TIF was passed. And certainly RETA, income tax, and property taxes are different. The TIF dollars can now be used for maintenance and operation of the TIF improvements, but it's strictly limited to roads and water and sewer. So you could only use TIF revenues for those type of operations if you've made those improvements with the TIF dollars. So just to give you an update, and that's something that's happened since this TIF was passed.
So to just draw out that picture, at this point, the only thing that would be considered TIF improvements is the infrastructure improvements that we've accepted in the MI development. So
100% correct.
At this point, it would only be if we're doing maintenance to the MI roads or the MI sewers or any of that. So
Correct.
that, yeah, just to, for again, that transparency and completeness.
Yep.
Okay.
State legislature
that.
at work. Yeah, absolutely.
So
Emma,
I'm
maybe
to,
go right ahead, Emma.
yeah, same thing. I was just going to say that I'm happy to show David's chart right now.
Sure.
Excellent.
Thank you.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Can hear you
Now
now.
we can. Yes.
Okay. So one, we wanted to put this slide together and hopefully everyone can see it. What we wanted to do is walk through why it makes sense to initiate this transaction now versus, waiting, and for the time, waiting for the point where MI has been repaid. And so what we wanted to do is just walk through some points that village can consider as they're pursuing this. And if people were to ask, why did we do this? So what we've put in front of you basically is a summary of all the factors that you would consider as you're pursuing this. So I'm going to start from the left side of the presentation and kind of work down all of these variables and then pause and then see if there's any questions. But what are the things that we know? We currently owe MI approximately $2,591,000. Well, in order to do the projects that we're considering, MI would have to be paid off for us to capture the next line item, which is the 641. That TIF revenue represents what's net after the school district has received their proceeds of the TIF revenue, okay? So there's nothing we can do until MI is paid off, and we can't access those excess revenues until MI has been paid off. So this financing contemplates, as we all know, to pay off MI, then we get access to that 641 on an annual basis, okay? What's the next item? The project amount, 8 million. Now, mind you, that takes care of all of the projects that the village has currently contemplated, improvements to the community building, the lake dredging, and other improvements. Other factors, inflation. As reported yesterday, inflation rate's 8.5%. Why does that matter? Because every year that goes by, our cost to do the project, the 8 million, will go up based on that rate. Now, we'll talk about our assumptions that we made after this, but that is another factor we have to look at. Then the next factor is how much what's the interest rate and what we would be charged today if we were to borrow money. So we have an agreement with the bank if the village chooses. First Merchants Bank has agreed to lend you money for 25 years at 3.77% interest. The next line item is 491. That's what your debt service will be on that loan at the 3.77 interest rate. The next item is your actual cost, your interest cost. And I'm going to talk about this in a little further detail, but why does that matter? Because you'll see as interest rates increase, what our interest will be as time goes by. The next item is debt service coverage. When you borrow money from banks, they want to make certain that the revenue that you're pledging or you're going to be using to make the debt service is sufficient to pay that debt service and slightly higher, just so you have a buffer and cushion in the event there were emergency or if revenues don't come in as anticipated. The next item is the excess money. So monies that are left over after that debt service has been paid. So what we wanted to do is illustrate what happens if inflation impacts our project costs or if interest rates go up. So as you go across, you can see every year, if you apply the 641, the MI payment goes down, okay? But if you didn't choose to finance your project, you can see that your project costs have gone up 680,000 based on the current inflation rates. And then if interest rates go up, you can see where your interest costs will be. So from 377 to 402. Now I want everyone to know these are just assumptions. So we don't it'll be until interest rate is locked at some point in the future. Now we do know currently First Merchants is offering you 377. The next item is what your debt service would be at the 4.02%, which is 556,000. So as you can see, it's slightly higher than it would be if you were to lock it in today. Your total interest for that project would be 5.2 million. The coverage ratio is 1.125. So everyone might say, well, why does a 1.15 debt service coverage matter? When you're borrowing money from banks, their coverage ratio and their covenants typically require you to maintain at least a 125 coverage. So the longer we wait, if inflation impacts our project or if interest rates go up, you can see how that coverage ratio goes down. Your interest cost from a debt service perspective goes up, and it impacts how much money is left over after everything's said and done. So big picture, what we wanted to illustrate for you is a summary of all this. If you were to pursue this and approve the project, you lock in your costs for your borrowing. So you know what your debt service amounts will be. You know, you've eliminated any future increase in debt service due to higher interest rates or your project costs going up. And then you eliminate the possibility of maybe having to eliminate projects in the future if you don't lock in. Because at the end of the day, we're basing this off of 641 that are net dollars coming to the village. So I'm going to pause there to see if anyone has any questions just to talk about the numbers.
I have questions.
Sure.
Okay, so the $8 million, that seems like an awfully round number. Do we have a breakdown of how we came up with $8 million, mostly for Eric, or maybe you guys know? That would be important to me to see.
Sure. We've built a few things into that. One, I think, David, if you could just elaborate, we have to keep some money aside for a reserve. Is that correct out of this? And then there's some fees that go to people, correct?
Well, a couple of things there, Eric. What we did was we used round numbers because when you go to the bank, you basically ultimately want them to approve a not to exceed amount. So ultimately, for those who are on the phone here, once we get the final project amounts, then we can fine tune this amount. But what we didn't want to do is go to the banks with a lower figure and then they approve us and then we'd have to go back to them.
Correct.
But in that 8 million, it would include estimated project costs and any fees that would be associated with initiating the transaction. So Eric, yes, you are correct.
Correct. So then to get to that overall 8 million, what we did is we started obviously with the building. The building, we want to make sure under the current conditions, with construction, that we had gotten originally an estimate for around 2.15. That could range upwards based on contingency and inflation. As you see, 8.5% is a lot. So I would estimate probably 2.5 million probably for the building, maybe a little more. At the end of the day, we wanted to obviously completely fix the lakes in this process, which we had some idea of that from earlier work with a couple different experts. It will involve a full planning set from our engineer. They have a specialist in Jacobs that deals with lake planning, but we know we're going to have to do it's not just dredging. So if we want to prevent, and that's a different discussion, obviously, but we want to prevent all of the current silt from coming in, there's a couple different engineering techniques to do. We're estimating upwards to 1.5 million for that project. Maybe it's less, but it's always good to err on the side of being conservative. So 2.5, 1.5, we're getting to 4 million. And then we need to pay MI off it's 2.5 million now. So we expect we'll probably get a little less. We're working with them on that, but we're saying 2.5 million to MI. So we're at 6.5 million. We've got a few other small things attached to this that we'll need money for, which include the amphitheater, we'll just call it an even 100 grand, a little less than that. And we're going to need to do some work, I think, as well for, off the top of my head, we just put $1 million in there for additional projects, which the council can make a decision on. So that could be $1 million for road work, pathways.
We have the maintenance shed that I can.
Yep. Thanks, Mayor. Yeah. I knew there was a few $100 grand in there somewhere. So we'll obviously have to move the, we're going to have to move the maintenance. What we have now is a little bitty shed. We're going to have to create for them a proper building, which is, probably a prefab type building that's still to be determined, but that's going to cost a few $100,000 so they can put real equipment, vehicles, things like that in there and work out of, like any professional municipality. So all in all, that adds up to, roughly 7-ish mil. And I think, we're getting, once we add in all the other things, reserve and fees, we're getting toward, we just said 8 million was a good round number, as David mentioned. So that's where we're at.
I mean, I would like to, again, I'm a visual person, so I would like at least a list. I think I asked you that before on Saturday. I would like at least a list of a breakdown of all that.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's going to be council's decision to make the decision as to what they want to move forward doing. Like we had, the main part is the reason that we have a round number is because that's the round number, but ultimately it's going to be council's decision if they want to move forward with walking paths, sidewalks, if they want to do the maintenance shed. I mean, we can put the things in there that we thought, but ultimately you guys are going to make those final decisions once this is done.
Yeah, still need a number, and we'll be happy to get you a list.
Right, that's what I mean. Is like sidewalks included or sidewalks not included? Do we need to increase this amount?
That's to be determined.
Actually, I'm going to say we don't know exactly what the building's going to be, and we stopped short of. And he's saying 1.5 million for the lake dredging, and I don't even think he's close. I think it's going to be well over 2 million. So my estimate that I got in 2016 was 1.5 million. And they're talking about doing 4 bays and all that other kind of stuff. So if we end up actually, and I believe the plan to do the overall plan, my understanding was $60,000 to $80,000 just to start with for the master plan.
Yeah, that's soft cost. So essentially we have to plug some things in there from assumptions, because I think we'll let our finance advisors get into the discussion of why we take all the money at once. And so there's obviously some leeway we have to give. We have some solid numbers and we have some fungible numbers, and some of the stuff is left to decision after we have the money.
Yeah, I just wanted a little bit of a rough estimate of what's included, what's not, what's going on, instead of just saying that's $8 million. So that's, again,
yeah, we have solid projects. We'll give you a list. Some of it though is going to be left to council's overall decision, and that's part of the fun with this whole project. We'll get it to you.
And just as your lawyers, and to give a tax exempt opinion on the project, we'll need that list as well. So when we ultimately do the final deal, we're going to have all that information as well before we would give an opinion that the bonds would be tax exempt and the money would be spent in 3 years or less.
Thank you for that.
We always are asking for those lists too.
I just want to make sure that we're making an informed decision from council. So, at least a rough estimate would be good.
And then if I can just add, the other thing that's important for us here, and Mr. Tiggett talked about it, and Eric and Council President Wolf, the TIF exemption is only for a certain period of time. This was the maximum amount of 30 years. And so we'd be taking advantage of the last 25 years to redirect those dollars to use it to pay debt service on these financing for the infrastructure improvements. And just for everyone on the call, when your advisors and lawyers say we mean the village.
I guess my other question is, this probably doesn't work that way, but if we pay off the loan or if we refinance, is there any sort of fee associated with that? Is it any likelihood that this rate will go any lower at any time? Do we need to talk about that at all?
So to answer that question, this rate is fixed for the life of the loan. So for 25 years. If you want to prepay it, it has to be in place for at least 10 years before you can repay or refinance or pay off those bonds. So that's typically how most municipal finances are structured, in that they have to be in place for 10 years.
That sounds good. Thank you.
And then I'll just add one more detail. The rate of 3.77 this bank is given.
You just froze him.
This is the best rate he was able to obtain.
Emmett, can you repeat that? You got froze.
Am I back?
Yes.
Yes.
I'll turn off the video. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. The rate that the 3.77 that Mr. Tiggett was able to obtain, he also asked other banks this was the best rate, and this rate will be available, locked in for 45 days once the term sheet is signed. And maybe David, you can give us some status on that, which is a nice feature too, because that we do the financing here in the next 45 days. We know we've got that rate. If we go longer, we'd be subject to looking at a different arrangement.
Yeah, this is David. This is David Rogers. I'll go ahead and speak for a second. My screen may say Frost Brown Todd. I'm here today and happy to be here in the role as president of FBT Project Finance Advisors. We're the municipal advisor, financial advisor for the village on this transaction. The feature of the bank locking the rate as soon as we get that term sheet signed for 45 days is better than the usual financing cities and villages get in the marketplace. Usually they engage all the people that are on this call to start doing documents and going to the market and saying who will give you the best interest rate. And if rates go up and we spend 25 or 30 days to get it all done, you're subject to the market and the rates go up and you end up with not 3.77, it might be 4.77. And so locking in this rate is a good feature that's been helped to obtain by David Tiggett and his colleagues at the bank. And so working with a local bank is something that is a little unusual in the marketplace, but in this case should be very beneficial to Minerva Park because the key is to, as soon as possible, lock this rate in. And of course, if the markets, plunge and the rates all go down, we can say, well, wait a minute, we've locked in the rate, but now let's talk to you again. And so the 3.77 rate is a very good rate. And we've seen examples from other banks that might be interested, and the rates are much higher. So that's why we're all pretty happy, the lawyers and advisors that are on the call.
I have a question about that too. Is, again, visual person, is there a way to provide at least a little bit of a comparison? Everybody's telling me this is a great rate, but I really haven't seen any comparison.
Eric,
so
yeah, well, Eric has some indications of interest from some other banks that I think he could share, and maybe we want to redact the name of the banks. And David Tiggett, who's been acting as the arranger, you can speak to that. But why don't you talk about the other rates that people have quoted?
And one of the things that we have spoken more than maybe so
I can't hear
David. Yeah, your internet's going out bad, David.
David, turn your video off. That may help.
My apologies. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
How's that?
Much better.
Okay. So we went to several banks, and I'll leave their names confidential at this point, but most of them will not lend you money longer than 20 years, okay? And in your case, we needed to borrow money as long as we could, so that way we could give you the ability to finance as many of the projects as you so chose. The second piece was that you are using TIF revenues to finance the projects. And a lot of the banks will not lend against TIF revenues. They want a GO pledge. And so, you know, taking all those factors into mind, we found a bank who is willing to lend you money longer than the traditional 20 years, and they're going 25. And they're willing to lend against the TIF revenue. Now, a lot of that had to do with, you know, those TIF revenues have already been in place. They're stabilized. You guys have, the community has been paying those for 3 or 4 years now. So those were other factors as well, but there aren't too many banks out there that will lend for 25 years. There was one that we looked at, but you have to be a larger community and a very highly rated community, meaning have a Moody's or S&P rating of a AA+ or higher. So that's why when we say this is a good deal for you, that's why we're saying that, and that's how we get to that conclusion. And then we looked at traditional transactions that have priced out in the market, where we've gone to the public market and sold bonds, and your interest rate in comparison to them has been very competitive. And so our biggest task is to make sure that we lock in this rate before the Feds make their announcement that they're going to raise rates in the first part of May. So that's why we've been trying to push this along faster in your case. So I'll pause there, see if there's any other questions.
That pretty much sums it up. Yeah. Those were the questions I had. Like, do we do enough shopping around? I mean, I understand the Fed rates are going to go up. So that's also my concern. I'm sure we want to lock this in, but in regards to passing this, would we have to pass this as an emergency, or is this something we can talk about later?
So this is Jesse.
I think I could answer that. If it takes us 3 weeks to actually get it done in 30 days, I don't think we're going to meet the 45-day deadline.
That's right. This is Jesse jumping in, and I've done my research on this, and I'm sure that Emma and Emmett and David can back me up on that, but this is a perfectly legitimate reason for passing something by emergency. And we won't, like the mayor just said, we will not hit the window if we don't pass it by emergency. That'll kick us out into the 70-day range by the time it'll become effective.
And I think it is important to have the 3 readings, even more so. Again, that's just my opinion. I feel like, you know, I don't want to rush it any further than, you know, doing back-to-back meetings or anything like that. I feel like spreading the meetings out a week apart from each other gives us ample time to answer any questions. Anybody that has any questions, obviously this is going to be published tomorrow. We will get this to the website. If anybody has anything, anybody calls in, this is exactly where we're going to direct them to, which is why we also wanted to explain the TIF, and we wanted to explain all of this in detail, because this is a great tool for anybody to be able to pull up the information. But ultimately the 3 readings and 30 days, if you only have a 45-day window to get it locked in, we're not going to make it. And by the 1st of May, we already know that there's going to be we all assume that there's going to be an increase, and that's not something we're saying you're going to be able to see it online, but I think we all kind of know it's coming.
Thank you for that explanation.
All right.
Do we want to move on a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, what else? David, did you have more to cover, or did Frost Brown Todd, any of those representatives, have more to cover in explanation of the financing? I mean, I will share that I really like the chart that's in front of us, because it very clearly shows that if we don't engage in this now, the trade-off will very quickly become we won't be able to do as much in the future, right? That by not acting now, we won't have the kind of coverage, the debt service coverage that we'll need to be able to borrow the kind of money we'll need to do the work we want to do. I hadn't quite put all that together in such a clear chart as this, and I think that's very powerful.
A quick question. The interest cost, the 4.285, So that would be the total interest we pay on the $8 million loan over the life of the 25 years?
That is correct.
Okay.
So when, yep, you nailed it. That's exactly right.
And that seems like a huge number until you look at your home payout when you take a 25 or 30-year mortgage and go, oh, my house will cost me twice what I'm actually paying for it.
Can anybody do the math for me and figure out what $8 million with an 8.5% inflation rate would be, just so I can compare?
That's what you see there at the 8,680,000 in year 2023. So see how your project amount goes up year over year? That's based on the corresponding year's inflation rate. So what you're borrowing today, 8 million, if you were to do that next year at an 8.5% inflation rate, your project now is going to cost you 8,680,000.
Awesome.
And
great.
then,
I love it.
And then what we did was, because we don't have a crystal ball on interest rates or inflation rates, we just held constant, you know, but you can see if we have 3% inflation rate year over year, in year 27, your $8 million project will now cost you $9,070,000. But if you want to leverage that $641,000 of TIF revenues, you're going to have to reduce your project size or reduce what you would want to improve.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's all I got. Sounds pretty good.
Nikki, I know you came with questions, or you had questions beforehand. Have they all been answered? What other questions do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think between the multiple explanations and some of the questions that Councilperson Koss has asked, I think that I'm feeling a lot more comfortable with this. Again, if this is just numbers are not my thing. So I want to make sure that if I'm voting on something that I'm making, again, an informed decision. So I appreciate everybody taking the time to do this.
At the end of this, Nikki, or anybody else that's on here, if you guys do have questions that you just don't feel, I mean, I know this is live and this is to try to get as many questions. And again, Stacy, thank you for asking so many questions. If you have other questions and you just feel like you want to ask them later, do not hesitate to send them to me. You can send them to myself and Eric. We can make sure we forward it to the right person if we don't know the answer. Again, we want everybody to be comfortable when it comes time to vote. We want to make sure that everybody does understand, you know, there's a lot that goes into this. And I said I was going to keep my mouth shut. And I know that there's a lot of people that can say these basic things. And I know Brian's hit on it quite a bit. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we've talked about getting the lakes done. We've talked about doing so many things. This actually puts us on a time frame of getting these things done. $8 million looks extremely scary. And I think that's the hardest part for all of us when it comes to this. Now, again, the basically 2.6 right off the rip is paying MI back. We will get the list of the things that we like and that we think should be done in this, but ultimately, again, it is council's decision. We have to make these decisions and you guys need to be on board with them. But at the end of the day, you guys are going to be passing those as we get to those particular projects to get those done. But Brian said it the best, you know, having this done, there's not going to be as many fees when you go to financing the building, then you go to financing the lake, and then you go to financing these other things. Every single time you make these transactions, you're going to be paying these fees again. So doing this as a one big project, you're gonna move to get these projects done because we already got the hard part done. So I think ultimately it just gives us a pathway to get these things done that we've talked about for so many years, once and for all. So I think that's the biggest positive for me. It's not just about getting the building done. It's not just about, for a lot of people, the lakes have been the thing that they've been talking about for so long. So again, if you guys have additional questions after this is over, we don't vote until the end of the month. So don't hesitate to ask questions. And
we are going to have that breakdown, correct, of what you guys are thinking, correct?
Eric and I can work on it on Friday and get it to you, or even before tomorrow's meeting. I mean, he can email me his list and we've talked about it. I mean, honestly, it's exactly on here. It's lakes, it's the building. We've talked about the walking, you know, the paths or whatever, but it's going to depend, you know, ultimately those are our goals and the maintenance building. But if we run out of money before we get to the final thing, then I mean, obviously the building and the lakes are the two, number one and number two, and paying off MI. Those are the top three.
Absolutely.
Number four would then be the maintenance building, and 5 would be the walking paths. I mean, that's the quick answer.
The trick would be, we just wanted to make sure we took maximum amount of money that was within a safe zone, right? That was conservative based on everybody's work here. And that would leave us some, leftover, within the TIF. So there was some leeway. And that was kind of what council then does with the, obviously we all want a building. That'd be great. But at the end of the day, the money that's there is for council's final decision and how we divvy it up to get the projects done in the village. So I think it's very, very important, regardless, to take advantage of your financing options here and now.
Ready, devil's advocate. What happens if we try to finance a project and we only have half the money? Like, is there some sort of legal problem involved? So
we would have other options, right?
That's a question for legal.
Well, hold on. I think your question's sort of not clear enough, right? So what you're suggesting is, with our top priority being the building, and then our second priority being the lake, and then we're looking at third project, and what we dream up, we no longer have enough funds available in this financing to do the entire project.
Correct. We only have half the money, hypothetically.
Yeah. So then I would tell you that our options are to redesign the project to fit in the financing that we do have, or find other financing options at that time, if there's no way to de-scope the project. Because one of the nice things about doing this financing this way is that we have not encumbered other means of obtaining financing. Because this is the TIF revenue financing, we still have other avenues of financing available to us.
Okay, but my question is for legal, just because you guys mentioned that we had a certain amount of time to spend that money. If we pursue additional funding, that could delay us. So what are those kind of scenarios that we need to consider? Sorry, Brian, that's my concern.
Emmett, I think we had a discussion about this. If we were up against time zone, you weren't concerned, but do you want to share those thoughts?
I guess I'm trying to make sure I understand the question. So if we borrow the money today, we've identified the projects that we're going to spend it on, and we don't have enough money at the end of the day to pay for those projects.
For one of the projects.
For one of the projects.
We get to the end of the third year, Emmett. We get to the timeline of when we have to spend this by, and we only have $1 million left and we need 1.5 million. How do we navigate that?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways. On the legal side of it, what we do is when we enter into the financing and you have the money in your bank account to do the projects, we look at that as what a reasonable person expects to spend and during for the period of time you expect to spend it. And when we say reasonable person, we always look at that as what an IRS agent would expect, which is certainly not a reasonable person. And that's not a shot at the IRS. It's just that they have look at it a little more stringent. So if we have, at the end of 3 years, we've got $1 million and we still need to spend $1.5 million, then at that point, you'd look at other options, including using your general obligation, or really that would be the biggest option, unless you have other funds or grants that we could access to spend the project on, or the dollars on. That's where you'd be at. Legally, though, you wouldn't be in an issue other than the fact you'd be in a business issue of not having enough money to pay for your project.
This is David Rogers. I'll say you have multiple options. You'll certify your reasonable expectations the day you issue the bonds. 3 years later, if you find that you can't pay for a whole project, you can substitute a project that's cheaper in cost. Or if you have to, you can actually keep the money and say, there's no project I want to spend it on, and we can put the money in escrow and take some other steps. So you're not going to be in trouble legally, is the short answer. We've got several different options for you in the future. And what's different from doing this, if you're a construction developer, is construction developers borrow only when they need to make a draw. In the municipal finance market, municipalities have convinced people like the banks, they'll just loan you all the money at once and then you're in control of it. And once you get in control of it, Frost Brown Todd, as your bond counsel, there's multiple legal options to take care of it. One is spend it on a smaller project. One is find a little more money and spend it on the project you want to do. One is don't spend it at all. We could figure out how to take care of any of those three options.
Right. Yep. Or pay down the existing debt.
Okay. Yeah, that was my follow-up question, is could we do that too?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You know, as Mr. Tiggett described, that 10-year window, you know, we could, as David Rogers said, we could put it in escrow and hold it until the payments are owed and pay down the debt.
Awesome. Great. Thank you guys so much.
It certainly that does happen. And to have different avenues to pay down the debt, you know, earlier, that costs you more to borrow in the beginning. You know, those type of features usually cost some money.
Sorry, go ahead.
I apologize for my tardiness. Not to get too far off topic here, would it be possible to have maybe someone shoot me an email, or, you know, at the meeting tomorrow, I get a quick summary of what was discussed before I got here, just to keep you on the same page as everyone?
It's actually recorded and you can grab it off the website tomorrow.
Ah, beautiful. Thank you.
No problem.
And Tiffany, I guess my question now is for you. I'm at $8 million now. I'm thinking, is there any other project we kind of want to throw in there? Is $8 million our cap? Is it just a conservative amount? I mean, you know,
I feel like that was the number that we used because that was the comfortable amount. And you guys can all correct me if I'm wrong, but I think ultimately at the end of the day, we also don't want everybody to have a heart attack at the number that we're already doing. I think honestly, the biggest things that we wanted to venture into was the lakes, the building, you know, the basic things that we've talked about for so long. And again, the 2.6 is already the TIF. I mean, that's a large part of the loan just to start with. So, you know, at the end of the day, the 8 is really nowhere near what we're using for projects. So I feel like, and maybe everybody else can answer this, because when we talked with the financial advisor and all of that, I feel like that was really the comfortable number where we were at.
Yeah, and just to interject, there is the line item for the excess TIF monies to the village. And under this projection, it's $150,000. But at the end of the TIF term, any excess proceeds would then be distributed to the village.
Yeah, that adds up to about 3.75 million. So with the excess and our current estimate, and we expect obviously with a number of things, property values and otherwise have to go up a little bit, but gives us some safe, reasonable area in between what we asked for and what could be, right? It's a little fuzzy trying to predict the future, obviously.
Do the terms of the financing, they don't encumber that excess TIF monies in any way, right? We can, if we had a $150,000 project in year 2, we could, that is TIF eligible, we could still spend that money along the way.
Whatever the county, I believe the answer is, and I let all the advisors jump in, Brian, we get a distribution from the county. So obviously that money comes to us, you know, it's pledged to this particular payment system, and what's an excess goes into our whatever account that we have set up to hold the TIF funds.
Right. It's not encumbered in any way by this financing.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And I think David Tiggett, correct me if I'm wrong, if they wanted to finance more, which is what the restriction would be, they'd have to have 2 times the coverage to be able to do that for any additional bonds, but it doesn't limit the village from using monies on hand in excess for those other one-off type of projects.
Perfect. Yes, and yes, you are correct.
Yep. Right.
So wait, can you guys
translate that? Sure, I'm going to give you a translation. So you're going to have some excess based on the projections. You've got existing TIF revenues already, which make our projections really good, and we're conservative with respect to those projections and any growth. So you're going to have some excess, and those dollars are going to not be needed to pay the debt service on the bonds, and so those dollars could be used for TIF eligible projects, public infrastructure improvements. But if you wanted to do a financing in addition to this one, using the excess TIF revenues, you could only do that if you have 2 times the amount to pay the debt service on these bonds. So that's just, you're limited to do this TIF financing in the amount that we have right now. But you can use the excess, you just couldn't do additional TIF financing unless you had 2 times coverage.
Yeah, in other words, you'll have additional money each year for projects, but no one should reasonably plan that they can do a second borrowing and pledge and borrow more money. There's not going to be there probably won't be a $4 million borrowing in 5 years with these same revenues. These same revenues are going to be paying off this bond issue and then piling up extra revenues every year that you can use year by year for TIF eligible projects.
Right.
All right. So this is our one shot.
Right.
I think I'm out of questions.
That is good to hear.
Good questions.
Absolutely. Nikki, did you have, I know you were the other one that came in with questions. I don't want to head out or adjourn without making sure that you are comfortable.
No, I greatly appreciate it. Again, the breakdown, just understanding it, seeing where all the numbers are and having something tangible to actually take my time with. But I think you guys have really answered these questions in a great manner, and it's been very informative. So I'm appreciative to all of you.
Okay, I lied. I have one more question.
Okay.
Are you guys ready? Okay, so do we have a rainy day fund from like Rita or something? My concern is we have some sort of emergency sewer situation, which we've had before. Is there some sort of money available from another revenue source for us to be able to cover that or feel comfortable with that?
So I'm not going to be able to answer this as well as some other people. And I know, Kim, or even given Jeff more than 4 days in his position, he probably could answer this question much better. But we do have storm sewer funds. We do have money in those funds. We have obviously the general fund. We have many different funds in which we can look at. The positive, we have gone through the entire village for sanitary sewer. We have already identified and fixed all of the sanitary sewer that were failing or on the verge of failing. We are in the process of finishing the village on storm sewer projects. You have the new storm sewer. Those we usually do OPWC loans. So to answer it, yes, there's money in different funds. Do we anticipate, $1 million emergency? That would be pretty difficult to actually have now that I've done sewers. If a sewer collapses, you're talking a couple $1,000s or, even 10, 20,000, those types of things that we do have in sewer funds. But, if the entire thing collapsed, this isn't going to affect that. That's going to be way bigger of a problem than we have right now anyways. I know that's not what you want to hear, but, at the end of the day, if we had a $4 million issue, this has no relevance to it anyways. But we do have funds. We do have, I wouldn't call it a rainy day fund or anything like that, but I would say that is the general fund. There is definitely money in the general fund at this point in time. And we do have water line funds that are abundantly, if all of the water lines went out, we can cover that twice. But as far as the storm sewers and sanitary sewers, they do have their own funds. They do have money in those funds. We continue to use them. And we also continue to work with Jesse on other ways to get money into those funds, to continually refreshing and getting additional. So I know that that's something Jesse and I've been working on for the last probably year, and Mike Flickinger. And that is something we continue to get ideas and options into, including, I don't want to go too far, but our water bill, getting the money into the sanitary and the storm instead of just the sanitary. So we're working on a couple different things, but we do have the general fund. We don't have something called a rainy day fund. But we do have funds for all of those larger projects of water lines, sewers, all of the above.
Okay, I think that's just important to state on the record too. Yeah.
So usually in municipalities like ours, what is referred to as a rainy day fund is the running balance in the general fund. And from what I have, my understanding, and Jeff will check, you can call me out if I'm wrong, but generally the good practice is keeping 2 months operating costs in your general fund. And if you look at our 5-year forecast, which has this financing baked into it, I do believe, you can see that projecting out 5 years, which is as far as we go, we maintain that as a balance in our general fund. So we are operating under best practices when it comes to a rainy day fund.
But yes, good question, because you're going to have, that's probably the #1 question that people will ask.
So this is Jesse. Here's my question. Next steps. I know we have our readings set and then a vote. We need to execute the term sheet so we can get the paperwork moving. Emmett, what's our next step on that?
The term sheet is with the bank, and Mr. Tiggett, hopefully we expect to hear from them in the next day or so.
I don't know if he's on. Is that not what I just received? An updated version about an hour ago, maybe?
You did.
I think we did just get it.
You did. So I think, Emmett, the mayor can sign that without obligating the village, but getting us our 45 days, and then council can choose to go through the 3 readings and vote on it at the end, correct?
That's right. And so we'd want to, we'll do the paperwork, Jesse, to your question, to document the deal so that once, council deliberates and if approved, we can close, the day or 2 after so that we stay within that 45-day window. Put pressure on us to get the documentation done.
And we're looking at doing those 3 readings on the 14th, the 21st, and the 28th, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to ask why we're doing this as an emergency. Can we kind of come up with some sort of informational thing to put on the website? Just yes, so please. To please preempt that, because you know how that's going to go.
Sure. Happy to do that. And the short version of it is kind of what I said earlier, just so we're all clear and I'm on the record. It's to lock in an interest rate on a public construction contract, which is a perfectly acceptable usage of an emergency clause. So we'll get something written up for that for you.
Yeah, maybe on Frost Brown Todd, like letterhead would be good too. Yeah.
Sure.
Great answer. Great. Yeah. And again, this will be uploaded tomorrow. I know that Barb is on here, so she'll get this uploaded to the website as soon as possible. I may have her do it in her typical place where she puts it, but then I'm also going to have her put this, and I know she's listening, so if I can also get her to put this under like the facility stuff as well, so it's in 2 different locations, easier to find. I don't know if that's possible, but we're going to try.
I mean, maybe we put it on the front page too as like one of those quickie things. Like, yeah.
Does anybody have any more questions? Brian, I took your line.
No, yep, you beat me to it. I was just reaching to unmute to ask the same question. Oh, Jeff.
I do have a couple or quick questions. I believe we have 2 documents that are looking to be signed tomorrow or by Friday. One is the arrangement agreement with Key Bank, and the other one is the term sheet. Am I correct on that? And that may be more for Emmett to answer.
That's correct. Correct on both of those.
Okay. And Tiffany, did you receive the revised arrangement agreement?
I received an email and I believe I did, but I have not printed it yet.
Okay. I will stop in early afternoon tomorrow and I can get my side of that signed.
Perfect. Whoever gets there first can sign it, but I will probably go in earlier in the day.
Why is it KeyBank and not First Merchants?
So also, and I don't know if anybody really hit this, but maybe he can explain that. I'm going to let him explain it. This also goes back to how he works with other, I'll let him explain it. I know what I'm trying to say, but.
Yes. Is he here, or Emmett or David?
Tiffany,
someone
yeah.
Explain it?
Can you guys?
Yeah, David, take it. David, take it. We can hear you. Let David Rogers talk first. Frost Brown Todd is your legal counsel, and we have all of the responsibilities as your lawyer. FBT Project Finance Advisors is what's called your municipal advisor or financial advisor under the Dodd-Frank Act. We, and I'm the president of that company, have a fiduciary responsibility to the village. In the world of financing, when you talk about cities and villages borrowing money, you usually have a party that helps find the best interest rate and helps you structure the deal. And they're in between the village and the final lender. In this case, First Merchants is the final lender. David and KeyBank are acting as the arranger, which is why you have this thing called the arrangement agreement. But that's in the place that you usually would see a placement agent if you talk about a private placement of bonds, where you would try to go to the market without having the interest rate locked in, like we said, for 45 days. And so David can explain his role, but the role that KeyBank is occupying is really the role that could have been a placement agent if we were taking interest rate risk. What we've all done together here is work to eliminate that interest rate risk by working with First Merchants. David, now I'll let you talk.
No, David, I think you did a good job of summarizing my role. I mean, said simply, my job is to get you secure your financing and secure the financing for you. And in the process of doing that. So in this, as David stated, in this case, my role is an arranger, and that's to find a bank that's going to provide you the best financing for your circumstance.
I just figured if somebody saw KeyBank on there, they would have questions when we were talking about First Merchants. So.
Yep.
It's a good question, and my day job is to ultimately work with municipal issuers and helping them raise cash to finance projects. I just happen to work for KeyBank. And that's the capital markets group. Now we have KeyBank that we all know, who has branches, and they have, they take your deposits and have checking accounts and savings accounts. But I work for KeyBank Capital Markets, and our job is to raise and help you raise capital in government, specifically to finance projects. And so that sometimes means going to other banks, going to investors, going to institutions to find capital to financial projects.
Anybody else?
The only thing I have as a parting request is that PDF that we looked at, if that could get emailed around, because I really dug that PDF. But other than that,
who is the best person to contact for questions? Because I did have these earlier this weekend and didn't really get that much of a reply. So who would be the best person? Say we get this and I think of a question tomorrow. Who is the best person to contact for that?
Why don't you send it to a combination of myself, the mayor, and Mr. Wilczek, since he's your fiscal officer, and then we'll make sure that everyone gets those out properly.
I greatly appreciate it.
Is there anything else that anybody feels like we should know as lay people and that don't speak legalese? Like anybody last party comments for doctors and not lawyers?
Well, yeah, this is David Rogers. I'll go ahead and say that if you go to someone in the state of Ohio that borrows all the time because they need to access the same lenders that you're looking at, it's the state itself. And the state of Ohio is frequently in the market to borrow money, and they don't look to borrow it for short periods of time. And when the interest rates are low, they look to borrow it at fixed interest rates. So the the path you're going down is the path that frequent borrowers and frequent issuers go down. So although it may be new to the village, if you talk to someone that borrows money all the time, and I want to use the state as the best example because it's a really good credit, you're doing the same kind of thing that they're doing. So while it may be new to you and new to many of the citizens that want to ask questions, it's pretty straightforward in the sense that you're trying to get the lowest interest rate you can, and you know that you're going to get a lot of TIF revenue over 25 years. So why not use it to pay off MI and build some projects? So you're right. You're on the main pathway. You're on the main highway. You're on the interstate. You're really not on a back road at all.
I think the other part to this to remember is this is Eric's in real estate. I'm in real estate. This is way past anything that I can do, or I completely understand where they're going and what they're doing. But when they first started talking about this, I mean, it was the same thing. I was just kind of like, what? And actually, you know, Leah and I had made jokes about it right from the get-go. Like, I had absolutely no idea what that phone call was about. So it took us a couple phone calls to actually understand exactly what was going on and why we were doing this. Because again, just being in regular residential real estate, none of this made sense. Like, this isn't what you normally do. You know, we hired a financial advisor. We did all of these things. So it was coming from an outside person. So it wasn't just my little bit of information or Eric's or anything like that. So I do want to remind everybody that we took the extra steps. And when I say we, I mean council took the extra steps to get a financial advisor in here and to make sure everybody that was involved at Frost Brown Todd was working on this. There have been so many phone calls back and forth with all of these people, David and Emmett and Jesse and Eric and myself and Leah and you name it, going through all of these different options. So this wasn't like 5 or 10 minutes here and there. I mean, these were hour-long phone conversations for months and months and months. So again, this isn't something that we did take lightly. This is, you know, this was a lot of people involved going with what the best options really were. They didn't look at just one thing. So I do want to point that out. This is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the very first phone, conversations was when I reached out to Huntington and Fifth Third and all of that. That was March of 2021. So we have actually been talking about financing for this for over a year now, with different ideas and different options. So this is something that, again, there's been a lot of work. We've got a lot of people on the team that has got us to where we are. So again, if you guys have questions or anything like that, don't hesitate.
All right. I think with that, we have said enough. So I am going to call this meeting to an end and move to adjourn. And everybody enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we really appreciate the time and great questions, and thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody.
Very good questions. Good night.